So this is Joshua Hart for JTH Boxing, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Andy Clarke. Andy, thank you for joining me tonight. And how are we doing?
Good, good, thanks. No, thanks for having me.
It's absolute pleasure. Obviously, this is a bit of a different type of video to what I'd normally do. Normally, whenever I have someone on a Zoom call with me, I'll be interviewing them about a fight they've got coming up or how their fighters are getting on. But this time it's a bit different, you know. We're just going to sit back, have a nice talk, just about everything going on in boxing, especially over the next month, because there's a lot going on over the next couple of weeks in boxing, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's kind of it's a pretty busy spell, really, for most promoters. I think May, June, into July probably too, and then towards the end of July, August is generally the month that most people still try and take off. Although in recent years, you never quite know. I mean, Usyk Joshua ended up being in Saudi last August, so planning stuff can be a bit tricky. But yeah, the 2 months of the year where you feel pretty safe that you're going to get a bit of a window are August and January. No one really wants to train over Christmas. That's still pretty much why you don't get that many fights. But from mid-January onwards, you can tend to get a few. And um, yeah, that Christmas period from kind of the last weekend before Christmas to about mid-January, you're pretty safe. And in August, more years than not, you're pretty safe. But the next few weeks are busy.
I was going to say, obviously, we saw the start of the busy run at the weekend. So the first thing I want to talk about is Canelo's homecoming against John Ryder. Obviously, it was a very successful night for Canelo, another defense. A lot of people were saying that he looked a bit flat again. Could I just get your thoughts on that and what you made of Canelo's performance?
I thought it was a perfectly acceptable performance. I think he probably is past his best because he's had a lot of fights now. He turned pro when he was 15, and that's going to take its toll over time. He's had some injuries, and Ryder himself said it in his press conference after the fight, which is typical John Ryder because what most people would do in that scenario, having just toughed it out for 12 rounds, would say that Canelo's on the top of his game and is better than he's ever been because it makes your own performance look that much better. But that's not what John's about. So he said he feels like he's past his best. And I'd say he probably is, but he's still comfortably the best in that super middleweight division. If he were to go and fight Benavidez, which is the obvious fight, I would still pick him to win, although I would like to see it. Um, it just depends on what he wants to do now, really, because Bivol the fight that he wants. That seems clear. And he wants it at 175. He doesn't want to do any kind of catch weight or do it at 168. He wants to just roll that back, run that back, and he's convinced he can get a different result. I don't really see it going any differently from the first one, to be honest. I think it's a bridge too far for him. But I love the fact that he wants to try because I think that's really the only thing that properly excites him. I don't think fighting Benavidez or anyone else in that super middleweight division. Um, I mean, there's Morel, isn't there, as well, who's coming through. But I mean, you wouldn't put him in with Canelo. Yeah, that's far too soon. But yeah, I thought it was a decent enough performance. I just thought Ryder was. I mean, I was confident that he would give a good account of himself because I've covered quite a lot of his fights, and I don't really claim to know any fighters particularly well. I kind of make it my business not to particularly be really friends with anyone. But I've spent quite a lot of time with him in gyms and around fight weeks, and to feel like I know what he's about, and there's no quit in him. I never thought that there would be, so it didn't surprise me that much that he managed to do what he did, and I just kind of felt quite proud of him actually, um, because that was you look at some fighters who do tough it out, and then there's a kind of another level, and I just felt like that was sort of that other level where people will talk about it in years to come.
Especially in the scenario he was in. It wasn't just any old fight. It was Canelo's first fight back at home in what was it, 11 years, 12 years, something like that. You know,
Yeah, massive pressure, and the worry for me, kind of going into the fight week, was that Canelo would be so inspired by the situation that he would turn in a supersonic performance and stop John. And he nearly did that in the fifth round. You know, a lot of people that would have finished off a lot of people. That was my fear. But yeah, like we're saying, he managed to ride it out, and it's just a great memory for him to have because you've shared the ring with one of the best of modern times. outdoors at a football stadium. You've got well paid for it. There's not that much more left for him to do, really. I'd love to see him win a world title, Ryder. I really would. I mean, what I would really like to see happen would be Canelo fight Bivol at 175 in what, September? That'd probably be, wouldn't it? September, October. But in the meantime, just kind of let his super middleweight belts go and let other people fight for them, because he's cleaned out that division. He's got nothing left to prove there. If he wants to go back and fight down there, he's bigger than the belts now in that division. He is the man, and everybody knows it. So just kind of let those belts go and let other people fight for them. John could get a fight for one of them, and win a world title. I mean, that'd be great. I'd love that.
That was actually one of my points on there was where does Ryder go from here? Obviously, he made a great account of himself in defeat. There's still, I'd say there's not a lot left for him to do. You were right about that, but obviously a world title would probably be the icing on the cake for his career. Do you think there's any opponents that are suited for him that would be a good fight for a world title for him?
I think there's a few. I mean, I think, you could. I think the one you might not really fancy stylistically is Andrade. Everybody seems to avoid him, and I've covered a few of his fights, and I kind of understand why. It's unfortunate for him, but I do get why he wouldn't be top of your list. But I think, Ryder against someone like Benavides or Plant, I think Ryder against Plant could be a really interesting fight. And if you look at his performance against Canelo and you compare it to everybody else's who's still going in that division, who's been in there with Alvarez, you could make a fairly strong argument that John's number one. Benavides hasn't been in there with him, obviously. You're the two-time super middleweight um, champ at a young age, after all the kind of chaos early in his career. But you could argue that John's number one, and I don't think there's anyone in there that he would be really fearful about fighting, to be honest.
And would it be even better to possibly have that fight get staged in the UK as well?
Oh
Or
yeah,
any fight even really?
yeah, but it'd be way better to get it in the UK though, and I think Eddie would do whatever he could, to get it in the UK. Because if a load of those titles became vacant, and obviously they're vacant titles, and you've got two challenges, you don't have a champion. And then, the negotiations would be on, and you'd have you'd have a 50-50 shot. You'd have your opportunity to get it in the UK. And although, to be honest with you, I don't think he'd be that bothered about traveling again, Ryder. I don't think he would. I think he'd do it. But, we're talking in ifs, buts, and maybes here a bit, because if Canelo wants to just hold on to those belts for another year, which is what it'll be, because if he boxed in September, October, and then say he did come back down to super middleweight, it wouldn't be until next May, most likely. I just don't. We had a long period where we didn't have any undisputed champions. And then we've had a lot in recent times. And it is good, but it can also be bad, because it means that people don't really get the opportunity to fight for titles. And I know a lot of people don't really like the fact that we got 4 world titles in boxing, but there are some good things about it. There are plenty of good things about it. It just means that people get opportunities. But when you've got belts tied up by one person, or you've got belts tied up by 2 people, like we've had in the heavyweight division, and they don't fight each other, then all it means is that not many people get to fight for world titles. So I'd love to see Canelo set he could set a good example there, because he's cleaned out that division. He did it in double quick time. That was setting a great example. A top fighter boxing as often as he did to do that. And he could set another really good one here by saying, listen, lads, I'm going to go and box a lot heavy. But, I'm going to vacate these belts. You will get stuck in. And if anyone really impresses me, I could come back down and fight you. Why not?
And moving on, obviously earlier on, just before Canelo, essentially didn't dismantle Ryder, but put the work on him. We saw Boxer in Birmingham. It was a very good card, to be fair, from top to bottom. We started off with Danny Quartermain. He brought a very good set of fans. Then we had the rematch between Corey Gibbs and Jimmy first. Obviously, I've had Jimmy on the channel before. He is a great man. I was a little bit gutted to see him not get the win, but he was up against it, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I mean, he is a great bloke to have around, Jimmy First. Corey Gibbs, I thought probably did enough to win the first fight, despite the point deductions. But I had no particular issue with Jimmy First getting the decision, and he just did what he needed to do in the second fight. Corey Gibbs. He's younger. He's fresher. He's a good fighter, and he just managed to keep his gum shield in this time, basically. And that really was the difference. I thought it was a good performance by him, and yeah, I enjoyed it. You know, I enjoyed the card. Pitters McIntyre, that was always going to be worth a watch. We kicked off TV with Sean McComb, and I thought that was a good fight. Him up against Casey Benjamin, really enjoyed that. McComb's, an interesting lad, and he's good to watch. Casey Benjamin, we know what he can do. We had a good one with Tyler Denny and Macaulay McGowan. Again, that was a really, really close fight. And Denny's really kind of blossom boxing on Sky. Whitaker, I mean, he is just, every now and again you get somebody who, I saw him quite a lot in the amateurs when he was young too. I remember seeing him at the European Championships and the World Championships when he would have been 19 probably in 2017, and people were talking about him then. They'd been talking about him for a while before that, but that was the first time I saw him really box as a senior. And ever since then, I've just been kind of marveling at how good he is. And when you talk to other fighters, they all say the same thing. When you talk to GB fighters, they all kind of say the same, which is that it's kind of unbelievable how good he is. So I do expect, if he can stay fit, if he doesn't have any more injury problems, then I can't wait to see what he might do. And he's got that big star thing going on. I quite like his attitude. I don't think he's ever really going to look to humiliate or insult his opponents. I think it's just more about him. I think he's just going to concentrate on talking about how amazing he is, rather than go down that road of slagging anybody off, because I just don't think you need to. If you're going to bring that razzmatazz, you can just make it about you, and just not really talk about your opponent at all, which I suppose is in itself quite insulting. But I enjoyed that, and the women's British title fight was what we expected, because Lauren Price was a heavy favourite to beat Kirsty Babington, but it was a good performance. And then with Buatsi at the top of the card, I kind of thought during the week, the ideal scenario is that he'll kind of break him down bit by bit and then stop him in 7 or 8. That'd be great, because I watched quite a lot of Stepien in the build-up, and I could see that he was decent. The only thing you didn't really know was what would happen if he got hit hard by Buatsi, because he'd just not been in with anybody on that kind of level. But he looked very well organised, tight, in good condition, good feet, did everything pretty well, really. And Josh getting the rounds in wasn't the worst thing in the world, but on his kind of return to Sky, a bit like Lawrence Okolie a few weeks beforehand, people wanted more. But you don't always get what you want, do you? That's how this business is. And he seemed happy at the end of it. But we kind of needed that to finish with a bit of a bang, to sort of walk out of the arena feeling like, yeah, that was a really good night. As it was, it built in momentum and then kind of fell away a bit with the main event. But that's how it goes sometimes.
I think Boatsy did what he needed to do, but again, I think first fight back on Sky, he could have done with making a statement. Same with Okolie, but I think what people did forget is how long they'd both been inactive for before making their returns, and they had not that there's a lot of stuff going on in the background from what it seems. So for them just to get back and at least get the rounds in, obviously Okolie's moved on to a big fight and fighting Chris Benham-Smith, which we'll touch on later. Hopefully, Boatsy can do the same thing. Out of all the names in the light heavyweight division, which opponent would you like to see next for Boatsy?
Well, I'd love to see him fight Yard. I mean, he was on Sky the other day, I think yesterday or Tuesday, I think, yeah, talking about how he wants to fight Yard, and that would be absolutely terrific, because for all sorts of reasons, they know each other. Him, Aziz, Yard, Craig Richards, four London fighters, all about the same age. They all know each other from way back, and they're kind of all friends. I mean, I don't think they claim to be particularly close, any of them necessarily, but it certainly wouldn't get in the way of them fighting each other. Buatsi's already fought Craig Richards, of course. So I think that would just be absolutely terrific, him against Yard. I think you could create a real buzz around that. They're two really impressive young men, doing a lot of good things outside the ring as well as inside the ring. I just don't see it happening, unfortunately. I don't see a world in which, as far as I know, Joshua's made a pretty good offer by Frank Warren. when he was on the way out of Matchroom, where it looked like he was on the way out of Matchroom, and he chose to go back to Sky. And part of that offer from Frank, I think, was a fight with Yard. Makes sense, doesn't it? So I don't, obviously on BT. So I don't see how you kind of turn that down and then sign with Sky and Boxer and then still get a fight with Yard and it be on Sky, because Boxer, I think, would be absolutely adamant that it would be on Sky. So I don't see how that, unfortunately, I don't see how that one really works out. So I think he probably will end up fighting Aziz, which is a really, really good fight by itself. And he would be favourite Buatsi probably, but you would argue, should he be? Because Aziz is the one with the form. He's won a European title. Josh hasn't won a European title. So I think that could deliver us a really good fight.
I think you got to look at the run of form that Aziz is on as well. He's done it, that he has done it like an old school fighter. He's gone and picked up every belt possible. Uh, I'm going to say, now, this could be a bold statement to make. I don't think there's anyone in the UK that beats Dan Aziz at the moment. And I'm going to say that now, and people can hold me to that as much as they want. I don't see anyone that can beat him. I just think his confidence is sky high. I think he's very, very tough for a lot of the names. But I think he gets past Buatsi, not easily, but I think it's a close one, but I feel like Aziz might have that little edge. I don't know. That's just me.
No, look, I'm not. That's not a ridiculous statement by any stretch, because confidence is massive. It plays a huge, huge part. And what we know about Aziz is that he's got that confidence. He's got that wind in his sails, and you see from the way that he fights, the energy levels are high. And the problem with Boatsi at the weekend was that he didn't really click through the gears. And okay, you might argue he didn't really need to, but my worry is that when you haven't really boxed all that much, if you don't use your gears, if you don't really try and click through them, then you can end up losing them. And that would be, that would be catastrophic for him, really, if that were to be the case. So Aziz, he's got everything going for him, and there's no fight that he wouldn't take, because he understands the business, Dan. I really think he does, and he would know that win, lose, or draw against Buatsi or Yard or even Callum Smith. Not that that's going to happen, because Callum's got a world title fight. Win, lose, or draw, so long as he boxed well, it's not going to be any kind of setback for his career. And he's right; it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be, and that's the attitude you need. And he wants all of those fights. I think Callum Smith would beat him, but Aziz against Buatsi or Yard, difficult to know what would happen. I thought Yard gave a really good account of himself against Beterbiev. I was at that fight, and we were really close to the Beterbiev corner. And I don't think on TV, I remember watching it back the next week when I got home, I don't think on TV it really kind of showed just how close to the brink Yard actually took him, because after 5 rounds, he sat down in his corner, Beterbiev, and I was really close to his corner, and they were massaging his calves, and he was marked up, and he was blowing a bit. His mouth was open, and they were saying to him, "Listen, Arthur, you've got to pick it up. You're behind. You've got to pick it up." And at that point, he'd started strong, and then Yard had come back into it, and he was in trouble. He's 38, and people are talking about the age and all the rest of it. And I thought to myself, Yard has put him in this place whereby if he still doesn't quite want this as much as he always has done, he's going to lose here. But he's a great champion, and he came out and he got it done. But he really pushed him there, Yard. He really, really did. So yeah, I load of time for that performance. But Aziz is a massive handful. He's a massive handful. I just think Smith, with that extra kind of height and reach that he's got, I think could just keep him under control a bit better than the other two.
I just well, Smith obviously is all tied up now. There better be a purse bids have been done. Top Rank have got that, so he's kind of out of the picture for now. But then moving on, obviously we've already touched on Ben Whittaker, and obviously we have mentioned without injuries, who knows where he could go. Obviously he's back out on the Eubank Smith bill on what was meant to be June 17th, now July 1st. Obviously Jordan Grant's already a tough opponent. Jordan Grant's faced a lot of good fighters, and I don't think I've seen anyone really stand in front of him like that. Who do they give to Ben Whittaker next? Like, who can give him the rounds? Not
That's a
necessarily
re-
the rounds, the challenge.
That's a really good question. And when you get someone kind of that good, it's hard to know because for a while there with Azim, and they're different because Ben boxed a long time as a senior and Adam hasn't, but they found someone like Ryland Charlton because they thought that he would be able to do it and he couldn't do it. And then Santos Reyes did do it. With Whitaker, at the end of the fight, I was talking about Ricky Summers because Ricky Summers is from the West Midlands. You could put that top of a bill. He's the English champion. So that would be a title for Whitaker. He's an experienced guy. He's got a good record. He's been in with some good fighters. And you can maybe make that fight because he would make more money boxing Whitaker, Ricky Summers would, than anybody else. And if you're going to fight him, now is probably the right time to do it. But whether he would actually fancy it or not, I don't know. But that was one name I kind of thought of who would have a reason to want to do it, which would be financial, basically. But outside of that, people were talking about Moderna, the guy who beat Karol Itama, who boxes Willie Hutchison soon. Yeah, I can see why you would do that because it gives you that little bit of a yardstick or whatever. But personally, I don't know how long he would last. I'm not sure there are many people out there who would, and I think he will need to move quick. It's just really a question of how bold are you with him? Because people do still need rounds. Pro boxing is different. We do still need to know what happens when someone hits him. No one's managed to do it yet, but we do still need to know that. So there are boxes that you always want to get ticked, but with some fighters, it's not possible, and you just end up throwing them in. It's not an ideal scenario, but yeah, I think they probably will go for someone like Moderna or maybe Summers next. And then after that, he was talking about fighting Dan Aziz as soon as he possibly could. And it's hard to say with complete certainty that wouldn't be possible.
It's one of those ones. It's interesting. It's a very interesting one because we don't know if he's at the well, no, he probably could compete with the likes of Aziz and stuff. At the end of the day, he's been to the Olympics and everything. The Olympics is one of the hardest things like a boxer can do. But it's do you want to throw him in now? Do you want to wait? Obviously, we've seen Fraser Clarke. Obviously, I'm gonna talk about that next. They wanted to throw him in with Fabio Wardley, or his management did, but Boxer didn't. And it's what
Yeah,
where do
it's
they go?
difficult. It is hard because it's a balancing act. And when you've got someone who you think's a bit special, and everybody thinks that about Whitaker, I don't know anyone who doesn't think that. You the danger is that you can just get it wrong and you can ruin a fighter by throwing them in too deep, too soon. They get beaten and it shatters their confidence and they're never the same again. It happens, it does happen, and that's the thing that you've got to guard against. But like I say, the problem you've got with someone like that sometimes is that you make these fights expecting them to be hard, and then they're not, and then you just kind of you run out of options because all you can do at that point is kind of climb rankings and force your way into mandatory because no one above you who's got a ranking that you want, who's still got ambition left themselves, is going to want to fight you because there's just no reason why you would, because you're high risk. And even if they throw a lot of money at you, it's probably not the kind of reward you would want if you fancy your chances of going on and winning a world title. So it turns into a complicated business. I mean, he wore the Naz kit on the weekend, and Nassim was a good example because he wanted to fight for a British title. He couldn't because he wasn't old enough, and so fought for the European instead and won that. Some fighters just move past levels in their careers, and there's not really anything you can do about it. And it makes the people guiding them nervous because they think this wasn't the plan. We didn't want to do this. What we wanted to do was 6-rounder, then an 8-rounder, then a 10-rounder against a good solid guy. You'll teach him a few things and take him the distance, and maybe he'll gas a little bit at one point and have to get a second wind and rough him up. And you've got all these things that you want for them, but it's not always possible to get them, and you have to take that leap of faith. And that may well be the case with Whitaker. I'm really, excited about it though, because I do feel like the possibilities with him they are large.
I think a lot of people are excited. I was sat there on the night when he fought. And when he landed that first knockdown, I think everybody jumped out their seat when he landed that first one. And you can, like he says himself, hate him, love him, you're gonna watch him, aren't you?
Yeah, I think you are. I mean, I was never. I've never had a problem with fight. I've never had a problem kind of like divorcing what I think about fighters' persona from how much I enjoy watching them in the ring. Like I mentioned, Nassim, he was a good example. His antics weren't really for me as a person, as a character. He wasn't really for me, but I love watching him. So I'd never miss any of his fights, and it wasn't because I wanted to see him lose. I did think, God, no thanks in terms of the way he carried on, but it didn't translate into me wanting him to lose. So I think this kind of like, you're going to either love them or hate them. It's easy enough to just think, well, this guy's brilliant and I just want to watch him. And as for all the other stuff, if it is for you, then great, you'll be a super fan. And if it's not, then it's not particularly a problem really. But he understands that it's important to build that profile out of the ring. He's riding into a pro career off the back of an Olympic silver medal, and you've got to maximize it as much as you can. I saw him in the corridor actually. His room was probably about 3 doors down from mine. I went for a little walk after the boxing had finished. I got back and he was having a chat with Jordan Grant's trainer, who was in the room next to me. And so I just hung out in the corridor with them for a bit, and we, just talked for about 10, 15 minutes. And he's a really nice bloke. It is a bit of an act, but not a complete act, as in the confidence is real. That really is him. He believes in himself to that degree. And if you ever question whether he did or he didn't, you know what you get from him. But after the fight, he's chatting to Jerry, and yeah, just super respectful, really, really grounded, good bloke. But you switch into fight mode and you're someone different, aren't you?
Yeah, that's exactly it, isn't it? Obviously, in the last, what I'd say, 24, 36 hours, it's been a bit, let's just say a bit messy in terms of the domestic heavyweight scene in particular, Fabio Wardley versus Fraser Clarke. Obviously the purse bids got called off at the 11th hour. What went wrong? Because it just, from what it seems like, there was a lack of communication between Boxer and Fraser Clarke's management, because obviously they've lobbied the board to get him made mandatory. Boxer don't think he's, essentially from what it sounded like, they don't think he's in the position yet. He needs to have a 10 rounder. What do you make from this whole situation?
I think that's pretty much what happened, to be honest with you. What you outlined just there, because I think it was a disconnect between the promoter and the management team, because I was excited about that fight. I felt like Fraser was ready for that fight, but I can see it from both sides. I can see why Boxer would feel, what's the rush? Why do we need to jump into this now? We've only really just started to build the momentum because it was a bit stop-start at the beginning. Let's just keep that rolling. We don't need to jump into a 12-round fight immediately. I think that's their thinking. I don't think they were looking at it and thinking that he wouldn't win. Because when you look at the two of them, him and Fabio, it is a really fascinating match, though, because in terms of overall boxing experience, Fraser is the more experienced fighter. He just is, because Fabio started late, full white collar, straight into professional boxing. Unbelievable what he's managing to achieve. But in terms of all-round experience, Fraser's got more. Fabio's got more pro experience, but not actually that much more in terms of rounds in the ring. But he's British champion, and deservedly so. And when you kind of look at that blend, it is a great fight. And that's the problem with this, is that people were really looking forward to it. That's the problem. If it was a match that people weren't really looking forward to, and there was some very entertaining back and forth on social media as well, and there was, Fabio put out a brilliant Instagram of Ben Shalom kind of pushing a pram down the street, didn't he? And Fraser's face superimposed on the babies, which will have just driven Fraser absolutely crazy, I'm sure. But I'm all for that kind of stuff. And there've been loads of that. They're intelligent guys. David Adelaide was chipping in as well. And it was just, I thought, God, this is a really good example of kind of like how a modern fight, if you like, is made, social media to the floor, to the fore. And yeah, they did lobby for it and they did want it. And Fraser did want it. But as you say, there was just that kind of breakdown in communication between them and Boxer. And Boxer, for what I think are quite sound reasons, have decided that there's that there's no rush. But it's all kind of exploded in their face a bit, basically because yeah, everybody was looking forward to it, and it looked like it was going to happen because both fighters wanted it, and now it's not happening. But people will get over it. You know, people get over things pretty quickly in boxing. It's not like with the greatest respect to the people involved, it's not Fury Usyk. You know, it's no cause for great alarm. I'm confident that if Fabio keeps winning, then that fight that fight will happen down the line before too long, probably.
Well, I think it's.
And you could argue would be the bigger for all of this,
I was going to,
for all
yeah,
of this carry on.
it might add a lot more to it, obviously, with all of everything that's gone on now. But it's where does Fabio Wardley go? Obviously, Fraser Clarke's out on June 10th at York Hall against. Is it Harry Armstrong now that he's
I
facing?
think so. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
Harry Armstrong on June 10th. Eddie Hearn keeps saying that they want to get Fabio Wardley out end of June, early July. David Adelai's fighting at the beginning of June. Do do they pull David Adelaide off the June 9th show and give him the Fabio Wardley fight, or who should face Fabio Wardley?
Well, I don't think there are too many people who would really qualify. The two other people are David Adelaide and Solomon Dakers. No one's really talking about Sol, but he's the English champion. So he's better qualified on the British Boxing Board of Control ladder than David Adelaide is because he's got that English title. He's only just won it. I think if he'd made a defence, then he might have got that mandatory position before Fraser anyway, because he would have just been better qualified for it. And that ladder has to mean something, or there's no point having it. So it's one of those two, really. The Sol Dakers fight is obviously the really easy one to make because they're both with the same promoter. But then again, how often do you really want to do that as a promoter? Put your own guys in against each other, but it's not unheard of. And if you're Sol Dakers, you might think, well, look, I know all about Fraser Clarke. He was on the GB squad with him. He was his deputy basically at super heavyweight. And ended up turning pro early because he knew that he wasn't going to, or let's say early, before like mid Olympic cycle, because he knew that he wasn't going to shift Fraser from that number one spot for Tokyo. So he knows him inside out. So I don't think he would. There's nothing to kind of fear there in that regard. So that would be. What am I talking about? Soldakis and Fraser Clarke. I'm talking about Soldakis and Fabio Wardley is what we're supposed to be talking about. Apologies. Yeah. So that anyway, that's the easiest one to make, Fabio Wardley and Sol Dakers, because they're with the same promoter. Whether BT would go for the fight for Adelaide, hard to say. They might think the same that Boxer thought about Fraser, which is that he needs a few more rounds. He needs a kind of interim fight. They might be of the same view. But it'll be interesting to see what the board have imposed a mandatory, and now it's not happening. So presumably next, Fabio can just take a voluntary.
It's who qualifies for that voluntary defence. Obviously, the only other name I could think of is Nathan Gorman, but obviously he's just fought Fabio Wardley and lost. So who is there to hand him? That's the question.
Yeah, and the board, will have to approve it. It's not like they won't let you just do that against anybody. So it might be that it has to be one of those names that we've mentioned, or maybe he'll just have to wait for a bit. He could take a non-British title fight, which he did recently anyway. It's not an ideal scenario because you hope that there's going to be enough depth to be able to defend that title with regularity, nice and quickly. But you don't always get these situations. Don't always turn out exactly how you want them to. And who knows, Matchroom might decide, well, if there's not really anyone to fight the British title, then I would always feel like you should keep hold of it, because why not? Look at Denzel Bentley. He went off and fought for a world title, and there was no need for him to vacate the British, so he didn't. And it just means that as soon as he comes back, he's straight into a defence. And it's just a great way to keep the momentum going. But they might feel like, okay, well, if there's not really anyone for him to fight at British level, then they could just say to the board, listen, we did our best. It didn't work out. We need to go and do something else.
And now moving forward from the British title mess at the heavyweight division. I wouldn't say mess, just
I know what you mean, though.
yeah, yeah. Next weekend we see Katie Taylor's homecoming against Chantel Cameron. Obviously, Chantel Cameron wasn't the original opponent, but can we just talk about how big of a fight this is? Not just the fact that it's Katie Taylor's homecoming, but in the opponent as well. Like it could easily be one of the best events of the year.
Yeah, yeah, it could be. I mean, I do think it's a bold move by Taylor, and I mean, I love it. I think it's great because the one time she's boxed at 140 previously against Christina Linodati, I thought Linodati gave her a hard night. She won that fight, Taylor, but it was hard. And I remember that was like early November 2019, I think. And I remember coming away from that thinking that will probably show her and her team that she doesn't really need to be fighting at 140, that she's an absolute dyed in the wool lightweight because she had been for years and years as an amateur. And by the time she turned pro, she was about 30, or not far off about that. And that's her weight, basically. That is her weight. Now, I didn't feel like there would ever be any real need for her to step up a weight and give the opponent that advantage because she's Casey Taylor and she'll get to call the shots. People will have to come down to her, basically, or up to her, whichever way around it is. So the fact that she's doing it is bold, I think. And I do make that a really interesting fight, because I wouldn't say she's on any kind of rapid downward spiral, Katie, by any stretch. But the fact of the matter is that once you get past 30, you've had a very demanding career like she has, and you're a clean athlete, which I'm absolutely convinced she is, then the physical deterioration, it takes hold of you. There's just no way to stop it. And there are maybe some signs of that. Nothing. She dug it out against Serrano, and that was absolutely incredible. But at some point, someone will get her on the right night. I don't necessarily think this is going to be it for Chantel Cameron. I do think Taylor will get the win, but I think it will be hard.
See, I've spoke to a couple of people about this, and a lot of people think Chantel Cameron's almost a step too far, especially for the occasion. How does it play out on the night?
Well, in terms of the occasion, Taylor is used to this. She hasn't boxed in Ireland as a pro, so you could argue she's not used to that. But she's been a megastar over there for years, and she will be able to handle the occasion. It will be absolutely massive. It's not that big a capacity, the arena. They're thinking about Croke Park. Obviously, that didn't work out. So I think it could be a bit difficult for Cameron because she's going to be there all week, and it's going to be fever pitch. It really is. I don't think there's any kind of. I think it'll be easy to underestimate how intense that's going to be for Cameron. I think it'll be one of those scenarios where you try and prepare yourself for it, but when you get over there, you'll realise that there's not really any way you can. You just hope that you kind of take to it, and it spurs you on rather than has the opposite effect. I mean, in terms of the way Taylor will go about it, she'll go about it the way that she always does. She fights. She's aggressive. She'll look to come forward, throw lots of punches, set a high tempo, and I just think that Cameron towards the end, in the second half of the fight, can come more into the fight. She just needs to keep her nerve and keep the faith, and try and put as much of a dent in Taylor in the first half as she can. In those 2-minute rounds, it's not always the easiest thing to do. You can't just stand off and think that somebody will slow down because, generally speaking, they won't. In the second half of 12 threes, they might. So she's got to take it to her enough. But just landing on Taylor is the key thing. It doesn't even really matter where, but just landing on Taylor is a key thing from the beginning as much as you can. And just see what happens down the stretch, basically. I think Taylor will have enough, but it's hard to predict in those fights because they're 20 minutes long and everybody's really, really fit and they trained hard and everybody can pretty much go like a lunatic for 2 minutes and then recover in that minute and then do it again and do it 10 times. So, you can't take your time too much if you're Chantel Cameron. But also, I don't think you're going to be trying to look to match Taylor for speed. Your work rate, your aggression has got to be of a different kind.
I just want to talk about how big of an occasion this is as well. Obviously, they looked at Croke Park, but it couldn't be done. I think the Three Arena in Dublin is about 15,000, but it's going to sound way more than 15,000 on the night, isn't it? It's going to sound like Croke Park on the night, I reckon.
Yeah, it'll be. It's gonna. The atmosphere is going to be absolutely unbelievable. I was kind of hoping Talksport might pick it up, and I might manage to get myself over there. I think it's going to be. I think BBC Five Live are going to do it, but it is going to be mega. You know, it's one of those fights that you really do want to be at because people talked about the Olympics. You know, against Natasha Jonas that broke the decibel records for uh, crowd noise at any Olympic event at the XL or something like that. You know, it was off the scale. You know, they've been waiting a long time for this, for her to boxing Ireland. And people were beginning to wonder if it was actually going to happen. The Croke Park would have been amazing. I don't know whether you could have sold out 85,000 tickets. Everybody kind of just assumes that would happen, but I think you would certainly have been able to get not far off it. And stadium fights are amazing. I mean, I've been really lucky. I've been to, God, quite a few. I mean, 9 or 10 almost, which, I mean, my career kind of just came at exactly the right time for it. And they are brilliant. But at the same time, a packed arena is atmosphere wise kind of better. The spectacle of a stadium is tremendous, but the atmosphere is better in the arena because it keeps the sound in. And I'll have that argument with anyone because it's just true. You know, you get this amazing buzz around the stadium where you've just got this hum of constant noise in the background because people are so far away, and you get this kind of time lapse on the sound almost because people are that bit further away. It's a slightly delayed reaction. It kind of just cascades down the sands and kind of like down the stands and sort of like washes up to the side of the ring a lot of the time. It's a bit weird actually. But in a packed arena, if you go to the Manchester Arena or the O2 or yours in Nottingham, which is a bit smaller but still brilliant, the best night I think I've ever had atmosphere wise was Butte Froch in Nottingham. I don't think I think things will rival it, but probably not beat it because it was just like you ask anyone who went to that, it was mental. Those kinds of arenas, they are, you know, when they're full, they are amazing.
Moving on now, I want to talk just the last point I've got is just May 27th as a whole. A stacked day for world boxing, three world title fights all coming on at the same time. And obviously, we're talking about packed arenas, and another arena that's going to be packed out is going to be Belfast. Lopez versus Conlan. Surely it's Conlan's time to be crowned. He's already come up short once against Lee Wood. Uh, not that I'm going to complain about that. Um, but surely it's Conlan's time.
I hope so. I hope so. I've always been a believer. I thought when he turned pro, it would take a little bit of time to adapt to pro boxing, which it always does. It's still very different. It's not as different as it used to be since they turned to the 10-point must for the scoring in the amateurs, and they did that 10 years ago. It's just before they did it for the World Championships in 2013. So the back end of Michael's amateur career was the 10-point must rather than the computer point scoring. And he won a world amateur title. We all know what happened at the Olympics, signed with Top Rank. And he was almost there against Leewood. And I think the defeat against Leewood would have been a really difficult one to take because he didn't really do anything wrong. I don't think he did. Hand position might have just slipped slightly, but I mean, you know, come on. But when you don't really do anything wrong and you lose, I think that's probably quite a difficult one to get over because you just think, in one way you think, okay, well, you know, it was a fraction. It was a fraction. It won't happen again. But then on another day, you might think to yourself, but I boxed really well that night. I didn't really do anything wrong and I still lost. So I think you've got to be mentally strong to get past something like that. But he definitely is. You know, he's one of the, I'd say mentally, he's probably one of the strongest fighters I've come across just from talking to him and going to the gym to see him a few times. You can tell that it's there. So I really hope he does get it done because he's a good fighter to watch. I enjoy watching him, and he's got that great support in Belfast. I did his fight against TJ Dehenny outdoors at Falls Park, and it was brilliant. And packing out the Odyssey will be tremendous. There's nowhere quite like it. Belfast is a brilliant place to go for boxing. I haven't been there for since that fight, that Conlan fight. But he's a good opponent. You know, he's a tough opponent. And he's going to have to be on his game. But I think he knows it. And I think he knows that Not necessarily that he won't get another chance after this because he sells loads of tickets and he's a big name. So he probably will, Michael, if he doesn't manage to get it done this time around. But I think he's just so zeroed in on it. I do expect him to have the discipline and the ability to get it done.
I think it's a bit of a different fight as well. Obviously with Lee Wood, it was, he dropped him early and then thought he had him and kind of, I don't want to say emptied the tank, but he put a lot into that second round and those early rounds that maybe he faded earlier than what he anticipated. And obviously, Lee Wood's got that engine that will push him for the whole 12 rounds. And ultimately, it's what I think kept Lee Wood in the fight. I think if there's anything that kept him in there, it was his toughness and his engine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's when you score that kind of early knockdown, I could completely. He just hit him with that shot every time he threw it, didn't he? And I could completely understand why he went for the finish because when you get an opportunity like that, and when you're the one in there, not that I've ever been the one in there, but they know they're the ones who really know if the person in front of them is wilting, if it's there, if it looks like it's going to happen. And he's really experienced, Conlan. He's been boxing for so long, and the fact that he did really go after it would have been because he felt like it could happen, and then it didn't happen. But I still felt like going into the last two rounds that he was well ahead. And I thought a big moment in the fight actually was the knockdown that was given towards the end of the 11th. I thought it was one of those knockdowns where it was 50-50 whether you gave it or whether you didn't. I could see why he gave it. But, Michael will always say it was a slip. And you could argue that I could say 50-50. If he doesn't give it, then that's probably a 10-9 round to Conlan. And on my card at least, he's out of sight, really. And I know Lee knocks him out in the final round, but my point about this is that if that knockdown doesn't get given, then Lee Wood hasn't nearly got the same amount of wind in his sails going into that final round as he did because the knockdown did get given. That doesn't mean that he couldn't have gone out and done what he did anyway. But I think just getting the knockdown, and it narrowed it on the cards, and I think on the scorecards he went into the final round off the back of that. Not that he would have known, needing a knockdown to kind of it be enough for him to get a win. But so I thought that was a fairly big moment. So I don't think really much went. I just really don't think he did very much wrong. Like I said before, I think he did very, very little wrong in that fight, Conlan, but lost. And that, like I said, is potentially very difficult to get over. But I think he is over it. And he's got this opportunity. And I just think he's going to take it.
I think with the scorecards on the night, so I actually remember the scorecards off the top of my head. Two judges had Lee Wood one round down, and then the other judge, no matter what happened in the last round, Condon was going to get it. So the worst outcome it could have been, let's say Lee Wood just won the 12th round without a knockdown, it would have been
Majority draw.
yeah, it would have been a draw on the night.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So it was closer, and that's what I mean about the knockdown. Because that would have been a 10-8 round for Lee Wood, as opposed to what I thought was heading for a 10-9 for Conlan. So that's a big turnaround in the scoring. And just momentum wise, it just that was a big moment. And like I say, I thought it was 50-50. I could see why he gave it. I could see why Team Conlan thought he shouldn't have. But the reality is that in that situation, the home fighter in the 11th round who's trying to come from behind, if it's a 50-50 call, he's gonna get given, isn't it? And I'm not suggesting anything improper there. It's just that's human nature. That's what's going to happen.
and then looking forward, obviously we have already spoke about Lee Wood a little bit there. He's also in action on the same night against Mauricio Lara. I've sat here just to myself thinking about how it goes, and I can't split it just based on the way the first fight went. What goes down on May 27th in Manchester?
I mean, the first fight was amazing. I watched it, but I was listening to the radio because I had a problem with my sound, and it was just he was boxing so well, but he was always a long way from the tape. You get to midway through the fight, and Lara had looked a bit kind of never really hurt, but Wood was on top and he was landing good, solid blows. And Lara at times kind of felt like he didn't really know what was happening rather than looking like he was hurt. I mean, you will have watched this fight more times than I have, but does that make sense? You know,
Yeah.
it was almost kind of like what's happening here? Like, what have I run into here? I can't really get my punches off. I'm not really landing on him particularly. This was not what was supposed to happen. Uh, but what he always did was just, you know, people talk about fighters being dangerous every second they're in there, and he is one of them. Um, I just couldn't quite believe it when he got caught, Lee, because he was doing so well, and then just all of a sudden it was over. And that's one of the maddest things about boxing. It's one of the best things, but when it goes the way you don't want it to, it's one of the worst things because you just almost felt like it was one of those stoppages where, ridiculous though this sounds, it almost like it shouldn't have been, it shouldn't be allowed because you just think, but hang on a second, he's won almost every second of this fight, or not far off, and then you just hit him once, and 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 the corner stopped it. Like what? So it took me a little while to kind of process it when it actually happened. But I guess for Lee Wood, you just have to do what you did the first time around and just trust that this time your defenses will be that little bit better because he was beating him and beating him comfortably. He was outboxing him. But 12 rounds is a long time to stay away from a big shot from Mauricio Lara, and that's just, you know, we know that.
I can confirm now, being there in the arena on the night, obviously we say anything can happen in boxing, and sometimes it could be the best thing. That night it was not the best thing. I can confirm it was probably the worst thing. Literally 4 days after my birthday, I got the ticket as a birthday present. I was so nervous the entire week. Fight comes around, and normally I'll be, I'll be getting involved with the crowd. That night I was just sat there, just bricking it the whole time. I was like, oh, because we all knew how dangerous Lara is. And it was no joke. It was no secret that Lee Wood was an underdog going into it. And that's where there's that almost excitement but nerve going into this rematch because Lee Wood was doing so well and then slipped up. And I think it's more just a matter of can Lee Wood stay switched on? 'Cause it's almost like he just switched off for 1 second and then paid that
Yeah,
price. And that's the thing
yeah,
you
that's
can't
it.
do with Lara.
Yeah, that's it, and that does make for a really, really nervy, tense, adrenaline-filled watch, and they're kind of when you really want somebody to win, they're not the most fun, but at the same time they sort of are because they're just so absorbing, and really that's why boxing is like nothing else because you just got that sense of danger and imminent split-second defeat hanging in the air, and it can happen at any point, and with someone like that, it really can happen at any point, and particularly the second time around. I'd imagine watching the first time, you'd have been thinking to yourself, God, this is going well. I maybe wasn't expecting it to go quite this well, but he's boxing really, really well here. You know, this is, and as the rounds tick by, you're just thinking, well, he's well up at halfway. You know, there's nothing to suggest so far from what I've seen that he can't keep this up. And then all of a sudden it's over. Next time around, you're going to be like that all the way through. You're just going to be thinking this could happen at any second. And it won't matter whether if he's 11 rounds to nil up going into the last 10 seconds, you'll still be like that right until the final bell because it's those kinds of weeks are. I mentioned Butte Froch earlier on, and it's not really the same kind of scenario. But Butte came over with a massive reputation, and he was champion, and he was packing out arenas in Canada, and he was a big puncher. You know, he was putting plenty of people away. Froch had lost to Andre Ward, decided to go straight back in at the deep end. Eddie spent the money and got Butte to come over. And he was massively confident, Butte. And Froch was a big underdog in that fight. And I remember being really tense watching that fight. I was working on the card for Sky, but Ian Darke was doing the top of the bill. And I did the undercard. So by the time Froch came on, I'd finished. I didn't have any more work to do. And I remember I was really nervous for that because I really wanted Froch to win. I was always a big Froch fan. I really wanted him to win. And I was just really worried that he wasn't going to. and the early stages was quite cagey, and then Butte looked like he was getting on top, and then what happened. But yeah, so I know what that experience is going to be. It's going to be like for you, and yeah, you're right. You will be bricking it all the way through because you know it's possible. You know it can be done because he did it for 6 rounds. Um, yeah, I mean, it's hard to work out which fight. I mean, I'd say it's hard to work out which fight to watch. I know which ones I've got to watch because I'll be in Bournemouth. But if I wasn't, I don't know. I would just hope that all the main events were at different times, I think.
I think that's what's
By
happening.
some fluke, they were all at different times.
I know BT are moving the Lopez Conlon fight to about 9 p.m. main event, which was obviously about an hour before the usual time. I know Lee Wood's still probably going at 10. And then with Boxer in Bournemouth, it's very hard to move things around with a stadium show, isn't it? Oh,
Oh, I can't really hear you.
sorry. Yeah, can you hear me
You
now?
froze. You froze. Oh
I'm
yeah,
back.
yeah. There we go.
So yeah, I was saying this. I know BT are moving their card a little bit earlier, to 9 p.m. main event. But then obviously with Bournemouth and Boxer, it's very hard to move things around with a stadium show, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't really. I don't think. I mean, it can end up being earlier than you expected if you get a load of early finishes. But then again, you've always got a kind of ideal time for the main event ring walk that you want. But then there'll be a curfew with the stadium, so it can't go too late. So I'd imagine that they'll want it around 10 o'clock because stadium curfews are often about 11. Because I mean, football never would go later than if you've got some extra time on a weekday night, you might go to about 10:30, quarter to 11, maybe, but it's never going to go any later than that. So I think, yeah, I think stadium curfews are generally about 11 o'clock. So Sky will probably aim for about 10, I reckon. Um, yeah, so we might get lucky, people who are just going to get three screens out at home and see if they can flick between them all might get lucky.
The little next point I've got before we move on to obviously Boxer and Bournemouth. Obviously, the winner of this, of Lara versus Wood 2, is it's looking like they're going to be facing Josh Warrington next. But where does the loser go? Obviously, Lara's a lot younger than Lee Wood, so I'd say even if Lara loses, he can still get himself back into it because he's only, what, 24, 25. For me, it's more where does Lee Wood go if he loses?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Lara. I don't. If Lara loses, then he'll just keep going and get another world title fight as soon as he can. And I wouldn't imagine that would be a huge problem for him because the thing about somebody like him is that when he does lose, I don't see it being a massive problem for him. I don't see it being something that's just going to cripple his confidence and ruin him as a fighter. I just don't think it would. I think he'd just chalk it up to, all right, well, this is boxing. Either I'm going to chin you or you're going to chin me, and that's how it is. For Lee, I mean, what more is there left for him to do? To be honest with you,
I'd say personal note for Lee Wood is he's always wanted that fight at the Forest Stadium, the City Ground.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
But it's just obviously a lot of people spoke about the Warrington fight, but then again, a lot of people I've spoke to have said that they don't believe that fight will sell as well without a world title on the table. And obviously, if Warrington gets tied up with Lava for a trilogy, does Lee Wood just sit around? Lee Wood has spoke about retiring soon. I remember before the first Lara fight, he said 3 or 4 more fights, then he'll probably hang the gloves up. So it's just what does he do if he loses again? Does he sit around and wait for the City Ground, or does he just say, you know what, I've done what I wanted to do. I became a world champion. I can now step back.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's the other possibility if he loses is if Conlon wins, Conlon might decide that he wants to rematch Lee Wood and right the wrong and beat him. He could do that, couldn't he? That's not beyond the realms of possibility because, and obviously he'd have to go to Belfast because it'd be Conlon giving him a voluntary if he hasn't got an immediate mandatory with the IBF, which he might have because they like that, don't they? They do that quite often. But that might be something that Conlon wants to do because he always wanted the rematch and he didn't get it. But because Wood wouldn't give it to him, that might be a reason why he won't give a fight to Wood and a payday and all those kinds of things. There's all sorts of ego and stuff that ends up contributing to what may or may not happen. But that's not beyond the realms of possibility because it would be an easy fight to sell. It's another all British fight, and that would be a way to kind of, well, it wouldn't be a way to bide some time. It would be another great opportunity. I think people are probably right that Wood Warrington doesn't sell as well without a world title. I'm not sure if it make that much difference though, because you look at their two fan bases, they're very loyal
Yeah.
and they kind of they know what they've been through, those two.
I
So
think
I think it'd sell pretty well without a world title, to be honest.
I think in terms of local, like locally, I think it will sell well. But I think if we look in the general boxing scheme of things, I don't think the boxing will be the biggest fan of it, but it will still, I reckon it will still sell out either the Leeds Stadium or the Forest Stadium.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know better than me in terms of Nottingham. I mean, it's always
very loud fans. That's what I can say. The people in Nottingham, both with the football and with the boxing as well, when Lee Wood fights, that the arena is very, very loud on the night when Lee Wood
Oh
makes the
no,
ring walk.
I totally believe that. I totally believe that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what's happened with it's interesting with those two, isn't it? Because COVID was a total disaster for Warrington. I mean, I really felt for him because going into that, he was in a great position, and then everything just went wrong. Everything just went wrong. It could not have come at a worse time. And then the Lara rematch didn't really, that didn't really work either, did it? And yeah, he got the title back, but then he lost it again, and it's just it wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't what was supposed to happen for Warrington. Las Vegas was beckoning. That was what he wanted to do. Um, and things have been a bit up and down for Lee, but you think about what a success story he's been over the last 4 years, and it's pretty amazing, really, because I remember commentating on his Commonwealth title fight in Peterborough in like March 2019, and his career had been in the doldrums, really. I think he signed with Dave Caldwell, and Jordan was flying high at the time because he was top of the bill that night, and they were living together. And then he kind of slipstreamed a little bit, and things started happening for him too. And he won that Commonwealth title, and he's just gone from there. And he was actually fine to kind of lose to Jazza Dickens and rebound from that. It didn't really do him too much harm in the golden contract. Won a British title, and then that win against Kanju was was an amazing night, to be honest. And I hope anyway, he's made some real good money since then too, because I know that the purse bids for his fight against Conor were big, weren't they? They were. I think he made about 850 grand off that, or something like that. I remember looking at that and thinking, "Wow, that's great," because it's not that he didn't believe in himself; he's always believed in himself, but it just didn't really look like something like that would happen for him. And then to go straight into that Lara fight, just shows what he's all about. And bold moves like that, you just want them to work for people, because the sport would be just much better, wouldn't it, if everybody did stuff like that?
And moving on, finally, for May 27th, obviously we've got Lawrence Coley versus Chris Smith. And I think this is a very interesting fight. You know, there's so many questions around it from me, does the crowd affect Coley, or is the occasion going to be too much for Chris Smith? Obviously, I know he's headlined in Bournemouth, but this is at the stadium, and not only is it just at the stadium, but it's for a world title as the challenger. How does that night go?
It's an interesting one, this, because they've sparred so much and they know each other really, really well. So there aren't going to be any surprises. You wouldn't have thought. It'll be very difficult for there to be any surprises that either can spring on the other. So I think in a way it makes preparing for it. It should make preparing for it easy, but I don't think it does. I think it actually makes it really quite difficult, because you're always wanting to come up with something, some kind of angle, some kind of insight into your opponent, see something that you haven't seen before, study them in depth, find something. And I don't really see that happening for these two. William Smith will be wary of getting tied up on the inside and it turning into an ugly wrestling match, because if that happens, a Coley's really difficult to beat. It's terrible to watch, but ultimately it is about winning. And if a Coley feels on the night that that's what he needs to do to get the win, then that's what he'll do. And it'd be very difficult not to do it if you've got that option available to you. If you've got a method of victory there in front of you, then you're going to take it. So for William Smith, he does like to get up close, Chris. He likes to drop his height, get low, come in and fight, that kind of mid-range. Coley's not the best at that. When people get in there, that's when he'll look to get hold of them and tie them up. It just depends. If he can find the right distance, Chris William Smith, I think he's got a really good chance in this fight. And maybe just the stars can align for him in a way that they sometimes do when, you've got the local fighter, it's at the stadium, everything's been building up until this point. Will he get this opportunity again for a world title at Bournemouth? It's not impossible that he would if he loses this fight. in his head, he'll be telling himself that he won't. In his head, he'll be telling himself that it's now or never. Um, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it because I think the atmosphere is going to be great. The atmosphere in Bournemouth last December and last July was brilliant. I like going to different parts of the country where the local fighter is, they really get behind them. Um, but I find it very difficult to pick a winner because a Coley is very, very difficult to beat. And the simple truth is that so far in his career, nobody really has come particularly close to doing it. They just haven't, have they? You think about all these fights he's had, and there's some decent names on there, and all the criticism he's got, but no one has really come close to beating him.
Do you reckon that? Well, no, it's not. Surely they might know each other's weaknesses from all the rounds they've done in sparring. But then again, sparring's completely different to fight night, you know. And this time, obviously, they've shared the ring before, but not in this type of situation where there's almost reputation on the line, not just the world title, but their own reputations are online.
Yeah, I mean it's different. It obviously it's different from sparring in the gym, but I just feel like they'll have had such a close look at each other over such a long period of time. I find it hard to believe that either one of them will encounter anything on the night that they haven't seen before. It is just about how it might just come down to who handles the occasion best. Coley, I don't feel is the kind of person who will ever kind of crumble in the face of anything. But Billiam Smith could be really, really inspired because he's the home fighter, and that could be enough to get him over the line. I don't see Chris being in any way fearful about it either. I think it will be a bonus for him. I think it'll be a plus, the fact that he's got this expectation on him. I think he'll thrive off it. And I'm hoping that it just blends nicely and that it's a really good fight because Lawrence needs that. Lawrence needs that. You know, there's no way that he would think that losing a really good fight against Billam Smith with the potential for a rematch would be better for his career than him winning a really dull fight. But in a way, it might almost be. It might almost be because he does get a lot of stick for the manner of victory a lot of the times when he's been high up a card or high up a card or top of a card on Sky or DAZN. So I think a fan friendly fight is what he needs, whichever way it goes, almost.
Isn't this a voluntary defense of his title? So wouldn't that put in a rematch clause if it's a voluntary? Because a lot of voluntary defenses tend to have a
Yeah,
rematch clause stuck in there, don't they?
yeah, they do these. Yeah, they do these days. Yeah, it's a voluntary, and I actually haven't asked about that yet. I'll ask about that during the week of the fight. I'd imagine that. Well, I mean, they're both with the same promoter, so it's kind of hard to say really whether the Coley's the champion. So I'd imagine that Coley will have a rematch clause. Yeah, if he loses, I wouldn't imagine that Billam Smith would have one because he's the challenger. So I'd guess that's what's at play there. And I think the ideal thing, really, kind of for everybody, really, I think um, for from a business point of view, for Boxer, for the fighters, for the money they'd make, Sky be keen, would be if Billam Smith pulled off an epic victory outdoors at Bournemouth under the lights, and then the pair of them had to do it again.
Well, Andy, that's all I've got for you. Thank you for joining me. I think it's probably been one of the longest videos I've ever made, but I've enjoyed every second of it. I can't thank you enough for coming on with me tonight. And yeah,
No problem. No problem.
thank you for joining me. Yes, thank you. Right.